Welcome back. Let's continue with the program now. And of course, the other big story to come out yesterday, former Deputy Chief Justice Dikgang Moseneke said that free and fair elections will not be possible on the 27th of October and has recommended that the local government elections be postponed to early next year. Yesterday, Moseneke handed over his report on whether free and fair elections can be held during the COVID-19 pandemic. In the past 2 months, Moseneke has canvassed the views of over 4,000 ordinary South Africans and heard submissions from political parties, electoral practitioners, as well as scientists. Meanwhile, findings of a survey conducted at the University of Johannesburg and the Human Sciences Research Council show that nearly 2/3 of the public support the postponement of the 2021 local government elections. We've got Professor Narnia Bohler-Muller from the Developmental, Capable and Ethical State Division at the Human Sciences Research Council to tell us a little bit more. Prof, great to have you. Thanks very much for your time.
Absolute pleasure.
So looking at the findings from, firstly, your survey, and then, of course, what was announced yesterday, Justice Moseneke recommending that elections be moved. I don't imagine it came as a surprise after your survey was done.
Well, it wasn't a guarantee that our survey would influence the outcome. In fact, our result came out just after the public hearings, but we sent it through to the Commission and the IEC anyway. So perhaps they took it into consideration, even though some of the leaders of political parties wanted the elections to continue, such as the ANC and the DA. The overall majority of South Africans, and there was general consensus here, felt that it wouldn't be safe to do so.
Yeah. So the whole, at the heart of all of this was the fact that what Moseneke said is that they will not be free and fair. So let's start there at the basics. What constitutes a free and fair election?
Well, it's an interesting question, and the Constitutional Court has actually looked at what this means in a few of its judgments already. So Section 19 of the Constitution entrenches the right to vote, political rights. And this includes choices. So political parties can campaign and have mass rallies, and so people can make a choice as to who they want to vote for. And so that would be part of the free and fair elections. And so we're a participatory democracy. So democracy is not only about the vote. It's not only about going to the polls. It's definitely also about the kinds of interactions that happen before the elections. And the idea was that because we are now in level 4 and under lockdown, we wouldn't have an opportunity to have those pre-election rallies and reaching out to communities and so on, especially the smaller parties that aren't as well endowed, so to speak, as the larger parties who can reach out in other ways. Mm-hmm. So the EFF, the IFP and the UDM would really rely on working within communities, and at the moment it's just not possible to do so.
Yeah, and that's, that is at the heart of all of it, because it is something that, the political parties do need to get to the people, and they do need to interact and speak to people, and that we've seen elections at play, and that's very much so how it works, in South Africa. And being in level 4, it's not possible, although we may see a level change, but I'm not sure it's going to stop the fact that we are in a pandemic. This is the reality. So going back to the survey that you conducted, let's get an idea of the number of people who actually formed a part of this survey. I mean, we say that 2/3 or 61% of the respondents said that they would like to see a postponement. So how many people are we talking to, and what were some of their concerns?
The sample size of the survey was approximately 4,700 respondents. But this doesn't only reflect the views of the respondents, because we weight the data. So it's generally applicable to the population in South Africa with all the statistical science that we use. And so the survey, first of all, it's a rather large survey sample, but also because of the weighting, it gives a very good idea of how South Africans feel about the elections. And so we were very confident when we handed over these results to the former Deputy Chief Justice as well as to the Independent Electoral Commission. And they did acknowledge receipt, and they certainly did read the results and hopefully took into account what the general public feel about this. Because even though political party leaders may want to continue with the elections, the people who indicate that they are supporters of these parties were certainly less keen to continue on the 27th of October.
Yeah. I mean, the understanding, of course, is that we don't want to hamper with the Constitution, because that is what South Africans are very, very fearful of. And there are binding constitutional factors, as Moseneke mentioned. What will happen now to the deal with the constitutional requirement that the Constitution must be amended by 75% majority of members of the National Assembly and supporting vote from at least 6 provinces?
Well, I don't think it's necessary to amend the Constitution under these circumstances. I know that a lot of legal commentators have said so, because of the fact that democracy is an underlying value. Section 1 of the Constitution indicates that there should be universal adult suffrage as well as regular elections. And the time period that you've just mentioned, the 5 years plus 90 days. However, the Constitution needs to be read as a whole. And I think this is why Justice Moseneke made the decision that he did. Because we are a participatory democracy, we need to take into account political rights, and also the fact that Section 190 of the Constitution indicates that the IEC must ensure that the elections are free and fair. So this is a very unusual situation. One could use the doctrine of necessity, for example, to say that we can take this to a court of competent jurisdiction, and the court would then have to weigh up what is possible under these circumstances. But it certainly wouldn't be a good idea to amend the Constitution. So I think another solution needs to be found. And of course, lawyers have different views on these issues, and we'll have to see what the court says, because of course the inquiry into this the outcome is not binding. The IEC is reading this 300-page report. They will then make up their minds, and if they decide that they agree with the postponement until next year, it will then have to go to court, and the court will either say, look, you have no choice, amend the Constitution with a supermajority, or we take into account these really unusual circumstances and therefore allow the postponement.
Yeah. As we say, I mean, this pandemic is very unpredictable. And as much as we try and have a look at the respective waves that we may go through, I mean, we're going through a third wave now. Nobody ever anticipated that it would be as devastating as it has been. I mean, we're with the Delta variant. There's threats of something called the Lambda variant, which I know they've confirmed is not in the country right now, but there very well may be another wave at the end of the year as well. Now, who says there won't be a wave coming in February? So it's a constant changing target. What happens if we get to a phase where in February next year we're in another pandemic or in another lockdown? What'll happen then?
Well, that's a difficult question, because we'd be under the same kinds of circumstances. But I think maybe the IEC would be more prepared for something like that with a little bit more time, because, of course, its own officials would have to be protected as well. But my goodness, I really hope that we're not in the situation in February of next year. scientists have been saying that we really can't predict what is going to happen because, as you say, there are these variants. There's no guarantee that Lambda is not going to come into South Africa. And then some of the legal experts on the Ministerial Advisory Committee are quite convinced there's underreporting. So there are far more people who are infected and far more people dying than we are seeing in the daily statistics.
Yes.
And that needs to be taken into account as well. So this pandemic really has turned our lives completely upside down. We're living in very, very difficult times, very strange days. And I think we just have to take it one day at a time and make sure that we protect our democracy, but at the same time that we protect our people. And it's sort of like the balance between lives and livelihoods. But I don't think that there's a risk of our democracy falling apart as a result of this. I think there was more of a risk when the riots were happening of a threat to our democracy.
Indeed, yeah, and also hopefully by February next year, if in fact the IEC decide or there is a decision to postpone the elections, more South Africans will have been vaccinated and there will be a lot more protection against South Africans. So just very quickly, and this is something to put into consideration, Moseneke did say that it's difficult to make global comparisons due to a diversity of reasons because circumstances differ from country to country, obviously. I mean, we've seen elections taking place in numerous countries up until now, and not just in Africa, but globally. Why can we not do it, but they can?
Well, I think there's some scientific evidence, and I stand to be corrected, but I did read something along these lines from a relatively credible source, was that there was an increase in infections after these elections had taken place. So it's not necessarily, an ideal situation in other countries where it did happen, because you do have these consequences as a result of that. So I think always from the beginning, we've been very cautious about this pandemic and the virus. And there are other countries who have been even more cautious than we have. So it really is a mixed bag. And in some circumstances, there had been more people who had been vaccinated than with us. We are not nearly close to community immunity, as they call it now. But by February next year, we will have a lot more people vaccinated. I think that there's some kind of momentum now around vaccination, and people are seeing that it's not causing harm to others who have gone and had their jabs. So one is hoping then that we will reach a stage where it will be far less dangerous and easier to then go to the polls. Because, if I look at the queues at the vaccination sites, the queues at the elections are going to be much longer. And, there'll be all the sanitizing going on. So the queues are going to be moving slowly. We don't want large crowds inside halls and so on. So it's a complex matter, even the purely the logistics of it.
It certainly is.
So I think we've made the right decision.
Well, let's see what the Commission decides, because just to end off the interview, we can really see the Commission deciding to make its own decision and not follow the report, because that is still their consideration. Moseneke said public opinion is extremely divided on this, and we saw the reports coming in. Political parties are also divided on this particular issue, and factual findings are not necessarily there, because we found political parties, civil society, and members of the public offering a much more subjective view as opposed to, anything else. So it can change at any time.
It could, but I think that the outcome of our survey was pretty convincing in terms of the high percentages. In fact, followers of the ANC, for example, 67% of them would like to see the elections postponed. And the IEC would have to take that into consideration. But of course, they can decide to continue with the elections. That would be a far more simple legal process to follow.
Yeah.
And we'll just have to see what they have to say about that.
All right, let's leave it there. So we wait, and the IEC telling us they'll study the findings, and perhaps within a couple of days or weeks they'll let us know what the decision is. Professor Narnia Bohler-Muller is from the Human Sciences Research Council's Development, Capable and Ethical State Division, commenting on the possible postponement of the local government elections. And that was our question of the day as well. And a lot of you responded, asking us, not asking us, telling us your views on this. And perhaps we've got one or two moments to show you some of the responses now. Let's put them up on the screen. Okay, we can. Let's do it. And this is what you've had to say. Would you like to see them postponed or not? So saying, I agree with the former Deputy Chief Justice Moseneke because of the ongoing process of vaccination of all people in our country, and all the parties have not yet reached their members due to the pandemic of COVID-19's third wave. All right, thanks, Rufilwe. Another one, Vicky, his predictions make sense as we yo-yo around lockdown levels since March 2020. Hopefully after the vaccination of the majority of people by then, we will be on level 1 or even 0. Oh, what does level 0 look like, Vicky? I wonder. Sam, the judgment is correct and it's fair to the country. Dikgang saying, I definitely believe so. We can't deal with elections now during this pandemic, especially during this dangerous Delta variant. Pumlani, the elections must be held in October this year with social distancing and washing hands. And since level 4 was announced, there's no social distancing. Those who want to campaign, they must do so on social media. His Majesty, he's quite correct, as gatherings and queues will turn into super spreaders amid this deadly third wave, with an anticipation of the Lambda variant in that very month. Sanisa Wuntu saying, but logically, it was impossible to hold free and fair elections. One didn't have to be a rocket scientist to see that. They knew what they were doing in the first place, but it would have been good to have them. Well, we still don't know yet. We'll see what the decision is. Kolile saying, a sober move as the country, we are not ready totally for elections this year, even in February. It is better to have it in May. The challenge we have at the moment as the country is the slow pace of vaccinations. And that's from Kolile in Gugulethu. Thanks so much, Kolile. Abela saying, good morning, Leanne and your viewers. Countries with high vaccination rollout are experiencing surges in infections. Australia on lockdown is reporting surges. By February the 2022, we will be talking of a 6th or 7th wave and a deadlier variant. And then finally, Babawa saying, good morning, Leanne. Voting is the last thing on our minds now. People are busy dying in Phoenix, KwaZulu-Natal, taxi violence in Cape Town, lockdown after lockdown. The above needs our attention. Voting can wait. Lots more where those came from. We'll bring a few more of those to you in the next hour here